You ever watch someone's carefully constructed image just collapse? That's exactly what happened in Paris, and honestly, it's the kind of story that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Meghan Markle went to Paris Fashion Week thinking she'd orchestrate the perfect comeback. Which she got instead was a scandal so messy, it's still unraveling. Here's what we were sold. Successful woman, former royal, stepping back into the spotlight on her own terms. Paris Fashion Week, high fashion, global stage. The narrative was flawless. She'd be photographed outside the Plaza Athénée, one of the most expensive hotels in Paris, where rooms start at $20,000 a night. She'd wear the right designers, hit the right events, and remind everyone that she's still relevant. The paparazzi showed up exactly as planned. She emerged in a Balenciaga coat, oversized sunglasses, working every angle. It looked like a masterclass in personal branding, except none of it was real. Behind the carefully staged photographs, something strange was happening. Hotel staff received instructions to provide VIP treatment, but the booking wasn't under her name. It wasn't even under a personal account. The reservation came through under a corporate sponsor, which seemed normal enough for a celebrity appearance. Fashion brands sponsor influencers all the time. But then a French entertainment magazine started asking questions, and what they found changed everything. The entire trip was allegedly being covered by Balenciaga. The penthouse suite, the private car service, the security detail, everything. And look, luxury brands partnering with celebrities isn't unusual. What made this different was the timing. Balenciaga has been working hard to rehabilitate its public image after some seriously controversial advertising decisions. You'd think they'd be extremely careful about who they associate with, making sure every partnership is airtight and publicly documented. That's where the story gets complicated. Sources inside Balenciaga started pushing back hard. They claimed there was no official sponsorship agreement, no signed contract, no approved partnership. According to their version of events, someone had been dropping their name to secure perks and accommodations under the assumption of a deal that didn't actually exist. The fashion house was reportedly blindsided when they saw the media coverage implying they'd sponsored the entire trip. The internet did what the internet does. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. Entertainment news sites ran headlines questioning the legitimacy of the sponsorship. Fashion bloggers who'd initially praised her Paris appearance started deleting posts. Comment sections filled with people dissecting every detail, comparing this to other celebrity scandals involving fake partnerships. And then, silence. Complete radio silence from her team.
She'd been active on social media leading up to the trip, posting cryptic quotes about authenticity and living your truth. Then suddenly, nothing. No statements, no clarifications, no damage control. Just an eerie quiet that made everything look worse. Behind closed doors, the situation was deteriorating fast. Harry had apparently believed this was a legitimate business opportunity, a soft relaunch of her personal brand with proper corporate backing. He thought their PR team had vetted everything. Now it looked like either a massive miscommunication or something far more calculated. And either scenario was damaging. The optics were terrible. She'd left the royal family partly due to complaints about how things were funded and managed, and now she was caught up in questions about fake sponsorships and misleading arrangements. The comparisons started immediately. People pointed out the irony. She'd criticized royal privilege and lack of transparency, and now she was accused of exploiting corporate names for personal luxury. French tabloids started speculating about whether hotel policies had been violated by using unauthorized corporate credentials. American entertainment outlets debated whether this constituted fraud or just bad judgment. British commentators, many of whom had never been sympathetic to begin with, treated it like vindication. And through it all, she stayed hidden. Reports started circulating that she was devastated. She genuinely believed a few friendly email exchanges with Balenciaga representatives constituted an understanding. Maybe there had been casual conversations about future collaborations. Maybe someone had said, "We should work together sometime." But whatever happened, it clearly wasn't the formal partnership she'd assumed it was. Balenciaga wasn't playing games. They issued a legal notice, specifically distancing themselves from any association with the trip. That's when the foundation really cracked. This wasn't just about bad press anymore. This was about her entire strategy falling apart. She'd positioned herself as someone who could navigate elite social circles independently, someone who understood business and branding. This scandal suggested otherwise. It made her look desperate, unprofessional, or worse, dishonest. Fashion industry insiders started talking. Stylists, publicists, brand managers, people who work behind the scenes to make celebrity partnerships happen, were quietly telling journalists that brands were nervous. Nobody wanted to be the next Balenciaga, caught in an embarrassing situation where their name got used without proper authorization. Her credibility in the fashion world, the space she was trying so hard to re-enter, took a massive hit. Even people who'd defended her through previous controversies started expressing doubts. Social media supporters who'd argued she deserved privacy and respect were now posting things like, "I want to believe her, but this doesn't look good." The erosion of trust wasn't just coming from critics anymore, it was coming from her own base. Royal family insiders couldn't resist commenting, mostly through anonymous quotes to British tabloids. One source called the situation predictably embarrassing and suggested it confirmed long-held beliefs within palace circles. Another joked that the only royal thing about the Paris trip was the price tag. These weren't official statements, but they didn't need to be. The message was clear. The family felt justified in their skepticism.
Harry got pulled into the mess despite not even being in Paris. His name appeared on some hotel documentation, probably just as her spouse for billing purposes, but it was enough for people to accuse him of benefiting from the arrangement. That had to sting. He spent years trying to establish independence from royal controversy, and now he was being dragged into a scandal he apparently didn't even know the full details about. When she returned home to Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly tense. Neighbors mentioned not seeing the couple outside for several days. Paparazzi stationed near the property noticed increased security and drawn curtains. It had the feeling of a lockdown, like they were weathering a storm and hoping it would pass. It didn't pass. It got worse. Fashion houses that had been in preliminary talks about partnerships started backing away. Publicly, no one said anything. Privately, according to industry sources, the message was consistent: too risky. The scandal had created an association between her name and questions about authenticity, and brands couldn't afford that kind of ambiguity. High fashion operates on precision. Contracts are detailed. Partnerships are strategic. There's no room for misunderstandings about who's paying for what. Her reputation, already complicated, took another serious blow. The jokes and memes spread across social media, comparisons to that friend who always forgets their wallet, references to influencers who get caught faking sponsorships. But underneath the humor, there was a darker current. People were genuinely questioning what else might have been exaggerated or misrepresented over the years. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. Even her most loyal supporters seemed shaken. The comments shifted from "leave her alone" to "okay, but what actually happened here?" That shift matters. When your core audience starts asking questions instead of defending you, the foundation of your public image is in serious trouble. And then the real bombshell dropped. It wasn't Balenciaga. It wasn't her production company covering costs as some kind of business investment. The money trail led to someone else entirely, a Hollywood media investor whose connection to her hadn't been public knowledge for years. His entertainment firm had paid for the entire Paris trip. The hotel, the transportation, the arrangements, all funded by someone the public didn't even know was still in her orbit. Naturally, everyone started asking why. Why would a Hollywood businessman bankroll an expensive Paris trip for someone he wasn't publicly associated with? And why would she allow people to believe it was a luxury brand partnership when she knew it wasn't? The questions weren't just about money, they were about judgment and honesty. Harry's reaction, according to sources, was intense. He felt blindsided and betrayed. He'd thought they were operating transparently, that her team was handling partnerships properly. Finding out another person had been financing everything, someone he maybe didn't even know was in her orbit, crossed a line. The argument that followed was apparently one of their worst, not just about the scandal itself, but about the pattern it represented, about feeling like he was constantly dealing with fallout from decisions he wasn't part of making. She tried explaining that this investor was simply a business contact, someone potentially interested in funding future projects related to her brand initiatives, but the perception was damaging regardless of intent. It looked like she'd hidden who was really paying, allowed false assumptions to spread, and only got caught because of a leak. That's not a good look under any circumstances. They barely spoke for days. She canceled meetings, avoided social media, stayed out of sight. The comeback she'd envisioned had turned into a symbol of everything critics accused her of: calculation over authenticity, image over substance. Journalists started digging into the investor's background. They found email correspondence from months earlier where she'd pitched partnership concepts around women's empowerment and lifestyle branding. It suggested the Paris trip wasn't spontaneous. It looked planned, strategic, designed to create a certain narrative while obscuring the financial reality behind it. Critics had a field day. The talking point became that she was using connections to fund a lifestyle she wanted people to think she was financing independently. Even outlets that usually gave her favorable coverage struggled to spin this one positively. The narrative had shifted too far. Hollywood pulled back. PR professionals started calling her radioactive, according to industry insiders. A celebrity stylist told a major entertainment outlet that brands were genuinely scared to associate with her now. Once Balenciaga publicly denied involvement, it sent a message to the entire industry. Working with her carried unpredictable risk. That's when the emotional toll became visible. Sources described her as inconsolable, crying constantly, feeling like she was under siege from all sides. She'd thought Paris would be her fresh start, proof she could succeed on her own terms. Instead, it became evidence of the opposite. She felt sabotaged by the press, by old royal family connections, even by people she'd considered allies. But some observers think the sabotage was self-inflicted. Reports suggest her assistant explicitly warned her not to use the investor's company credentials for bookings without a signed formal agreement. She reportedly moved forward anyway. When the story broke, the assistant resigned. That detail is significant. It suggests people around her saw the problem coming and tried to prevent it. Harry reached a breaking point. The united front they'd tried to maintain started showing cracks. They did a few carefully staged charity appearances to try controlling the damage, smiling for cameras, but people who follow this closely could see the tension. Behind the scenes, she was reportedly spiraling, convinced that leaks were coming from inside their own circle, that people close to them were feeding information to the press. Every night, according to sources, she'd break down, feeling like the entire world had turned against her. She kept insisting it was a misunderstanding, that she'd been trying to build something meaningful, and now they were making her out to be a fraud. Meanwhile, royal family members were reportedly pleased with how this was playing out. Not publicly, of course, but privately, there was a sense of validation. They'd always been skeptical of her Hollywood instincts, her approach to publicity, her understanding of how elite institutions operate. This scandal seemed to confirm those doubts. Palace aides quietly suggested that this was why reconciliation efforts with King Charles had stalled again. There was disappointment, but also a feeling of inevitability.
The investor at the center of everything disappeared from public view. His representatives released a brief statement denying any personal relationship and claiming payments were made in error. But the receipts were already out there. The connection was documented. Damage control couldn't undo what had already been revealed. In the end, the Paris trip went from aspirational to cautionary, the kind of PR disaster that makes even experienced publicists uncomfortable. Someone who'd once captivated global attention with grace and poise was now being characterized as manipulative and careless, and perhaps most damaging, even longtime supporters were wavering. Online comments shifted from "I've defended her for years" to "this feels off." When your own audience starts expressing doubt, you've lost something critical. Back in Montecito, she stopped taking calls, stopped making appearances, stopped engaging. The walls that were supposed to protect her from constant scrutiny had become isolating. And for Harry, who's dealing with his own complicated family dynamics, it was another reminder of how fragile their position had become. He reportedly told someone, "Every time we try to move forward, something pulls us back. It's exhausting." By the time everything settled, the damage was clear. Her reputation had taken a serious hit. Her prospects in Hollywood looked uncertain. Her marriage was under strain. And those hotel receipts that started everything are rumored to be in the hands of a UK documentary team working on a special about the Paris scandal and what really happened behind the scenes. If that's true, this story might have another chapter. There's no palace infrastructure to manage this anymore, no experienced courtiers to bury stories or negotiate with press offices, no safety net. Paris was supposed to mark a new beginning. Instead, it might have revealed something harder to fix, that reinvention requires more than good intentions and expensive hotels. It requires authenticity, and when the receipts contradict the narrative, no amount of spin can save you. Somewhere behind those Montecito gates, that reality must be settling in, because no matter how many times you try to rewrite your story, the truth has a way of finding the paper trail. And here's what's really striking when you step back and look at the whole picture. This isn't an isolated incident, it's part of a larger pattern. There's always been this tension between the image being projected and the reality underneath. The carefully curated Instagram posts versus the messy truth behind them. The humanitarian branding versus the luxury lifestyle. The relatability versus the inaccessibility. She married into one of the world's most famous families, then left citing restrictions and lack of freedom. Fair enough, that institution is complicated and demanding, but then the pivot was toward becoming a different kind of public figure, an influencer with social impact credentials. Except influencer culture requires a specific kind of authenticity, or at least the appearance of it. You can't seem too curated, too managed, too disconnected from regular life. And that's a difficult balance when you're living in a $12 million mansion and traveling in private vehicles. The Paris trip crystallized all of those contradictions. She wanted to be seen as a global fashion icon, commanding enough influence that luxury brands would sponsor her presence, but she didn't want to handle the business side properly, the contracts, the negotiations, the clear agreements that make those partnerships work. She thought she could operate on relationships and implied understandings, which is how things might work in smaller social circles, but not at the level she was trying to reach. And attempting to leverage a brand like Balenciaga, which has its own serious image problems to manage, shows a fundamental miscalculation. That's not a company in a position to take risks on ambiguous partnerships. They need clarity and control. Using their name without explicit authorization wasn't savvy, it was reckless. The fact that she apparently ignored direct advice from her assistant tells you something important. When the people working closest to you are saying, "Don't do this without a signed agreement," and you do it anyway, that's not bad luck, that's a choice, and choices have consequences. What makes this particularly difficult for her is that the scrutiny was already intense before any of this happened. The British press has never been kind. They've been waiting for something like this, something that confirms their existing narrative about her. And this Paris situation handed them exactly what they wanted.
evidence that she's image-obsessed, willing to bend truth for perception, disconnected from the values she claims to represent. The palace insiders are enjoying this. You can feel it in every anonymous quote that leaks to royal correspondence. There's a satisfaction in watching her struggle because it validates their initial resistance to her. They never thought she was suited for royal life, never believed she understood what that world required, and now they feel proven right. It's petty, but it's also predictable. Institutions protect themselves by pointing to the failures of people who left them. And Harry is caught in an impossible position. He left his family, his country, his entire previous life to build something new with her. He's defended her publicly countless times. He's burned bridges that can't be rebuilt. And now he's watching her make decisions that undermine everything they've been working toward. That has to create enormous frustration and resentment, even if he loves her. Because it's not just about her anymore. It's about their children, their shared future, their ability to build credibility in whatever they do next. The relationship strain makes sense. When trust gets damaged, especially around honesty and judgment, it's hard to repair. He thought they were operating as partners with full transparency. Finding out otherwise, especially in such a public way, changes the dynamic. The broader industry response is probably the most telling indicator of how serious this is. Fashion houses, production companies, brand partnerships, all of that depends on trust and predictability. When someone becomes associated with chaos and controversy, corporations back away fast. They don't need to issue statements or make it public. They just stop returning calls. Deals that were in discussion quietly disappear. That's what appears to be happening here. And the social media reaction, the shift from defense to doubt, even among supporters, that's devastating for someone whose entire post-royal strategy depends on public goodwill. You can survive having vocal critics if you have a loyal base, but when that base starts questioning you, the foundation crumbles. The memes and jokes might seem trivial, but they're actually significant. They shape perception. Once you become a punchline, it's incredibly hard to be taken seriously again. And the specific joke, that she's the friend who never pays, cuts right to the core of the accusation, that she's taking advantage, living beyond what she can actually afford on her own, relying on others while presenting an image of independence. The saddest part might be that this probably could have been avoided with just basic honesty. If she'd gone to Paris and been straightforward about how it was funded, whether through a business partnership, personal investment, or a sponsor, none of this would have mattered. People work with investors and sponsors all the time, but trying to create the impression of something that wasn't real, that's where it went wrong. You can't fake authenticity. Eventually, the documentation surfaces, the receipts come out, the truth becomes public. And when that happens, the gap between image and reality becomes the story. That's what Paris represents, the moment when carefully managed perception collided with documented fact, and the perception lost. Everything since then has been aftershock. The marriage tension, the industry blacklisting, the public doubt, all of it flows from that central failure of authenticity. And if there really is a documentary team investigating this, compiling receipts and interviews, then the story isn't over. It might actually get worse, because documentaries have a way of finding details that didn't make it into the initial news cycle. They interview people who wouldn't talk to tabloids. They create a more complete narrative. So somewhere in Montecito, behind security gates and closed curtains and carefully managed public appearances, the reality must be sinking in. The comeback didn't work. The rebrand failed. The attempt to control the narrative collapsed. And unlike before, there's no institutional support to fall back on. No palace lawyers, no experienced communications team with decades of crisis management. Just them trying to figure out what comes next. Paris was supposed to prove she could succeed independently, that leaving royal life was the right choice, that she had the instincts and connections to build something new. Instead, it demonstrated the opposite, that independence requires infrastructure she doesn't have, that instincts need to be backed by solid business practices, that connections don't replace contracts. The lesson here, if there is one, is pretty straightforward.
You can't shortcut credibility, you can't manufacture authenticity, and you definitely can't ignore the paper trail, because in the end, every carefully constructed image is only as strong as the truth supporting it. And when the hotel bill tells a different story than the press release, guess which one people believe?